Well, hey, thanks again for joining our Zoom conversation today. And we're really grateful to have Andrew Strick on with us to talk about motor learning. Before I introduce Andrew too much, I'm going to just go through a few announcements. As always in these Zoom sessions, if you have questions, we'd love to hear them. Just type it in the question and answer section down at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A feature. So just type your questions in there as we get going, and we'll work to have some Q&A time at the end of our discussion here. We also like to remind you that this summer, Gold Medal Squared is still running some coaching clinics. We've had to pare down the schedule to some degree, to a large degree, but we're still holding coaching clinics. And in July, we will be in Utah in July on the week 16th, 17th, and 18th. Location is still to be determined. On July 24th through the 26th, we'll be in Waco, Texas at Baylor University. That clinic is still, has been good from the start. So that clinic is full speed ahead. And then the following weekend, the 31st and the 1st and 2nd of August, we will be in Seattle, Washington, and space will be extremely limited at the Seattle clinic. We're actually in Bellevue at the Sudden Impact I-90 Volleyball Center there. Space will be very limited, but we've got another series of coaching clinics this summer that we're holding, and just wanted to let you know about that. So I'd like to introduce Andrew. Andrew, this is Andrew Strick. He got an undergraduate degree in sports medicine from Pepperdine University, where he worked with the men's volleyball team there. Andrew came to us highly recommended by Marv Dunphy and David Hunt. David, of course, the head coach there at Pepperdine, and Marv, the longtime Hall of Famer that's on our advisory staff. He was a motor learning consultant to the men's volleyball team from 2016 to 2019, and in 2019, Pep went to the Final Four in men's volleyball. He's worked with USA Volleyball on the men's team, with their Pan Am Cup team as a scout man, and he's currently at the University of Tennessee, as you can see with the big T behind him there, pursuing a master's degree and then ultimately a doctorate in motor learning, and he'll have graduate minors in stats and neuroscience, and a grad certificate in statistics, measurement, and evaluation and educational psychology. So he's got it going. He's in the middle of some big stuff right now. But Andrew, thanks so much for being here, and we appreciate you joining us to talk about these ideas.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah. Well, we'll get right to it. The kind of format that we wanted to look at with Andrew today is, as if you're familiar with Gold Medal Squared, you know that we've been advocating the use of science in our coaching from the absolute inception of the organization, and many of our founders have a strong background. My father, Carl McGowan, Marv Dunphy, Dr. Marv Dunphy, Dr. Doug Beal, all with backgrounds in education and in how science helps us learn, and in the science of motor learning specifically. And so the idea was, hey, we've been advocating for these ideas for a long time. We feel like there are three big ideas in motor learning that we've been teaching, and we want to talk about a couple of maybe new ideas that are out there in the science that that'll be helping us. So we're going to get a refresher on what we've been teaching, see if there's anything we can add to that, and then maybe some ideas from Andrew that'll help us with our coaching, that some of the new science that's kind of been circulating around. So Andrew, the first thing that we do at our coaching clinics is we talk about the fact that we want to base our coaching on principles, and we want to get our principles from science. The science that we really like to start with is this idea of motor learning, human motor skill acquisition. And we talk about it. For us, there were or have been three big ideas in motor learning. The first being demonstrations are valuable. The second being this idea of specificity of motor programs or of neural connections. And then the third being kind of the role of repetition and feedback in learning. And so let's tackle them kind of one by one. For us, one of the very first things we say is when we first have a learner, and this learner could be anybody from, a accomplished athlete to somebody who's never been a participant in the sport before. So we're going to reference a beginner as somebody who's just looking to make changes in the way that they're playing or moving or doing volleyball. So if you're an accomplished athlete, you might be making a change to the way that your mechanics are working. If you're a new volleyball player, you might just be, making total changes because you've never moved any way before in the sport. But one of the things that we emphasize very strongly is anybody that's trying to make changes at any point in time, that they have this limited ability to process information, that, the brain is kind of, again, when it's faced with these tasks, the amount of information that it can reliably process and then distribute to our bodies in movement is very limited. And that one of the best ways that we can work as coaches is to give players demonstrations. So this visual of somebody performing the skill has been shown to be very valuable. Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's definitely still the case, Chris.
And one of the things you were telling us about early on is that demonstrations are probably best. And one of the things that I think is interesting, demonstrations are probably best if it's not an athlete watching themselves move, but watching somebody else. So a video demonstration can be valuable so long as it's a video of somebody showing us how to move rather than a video of us critiquing ourselves. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Chris, what you're getting into is something what we call in the science of video feedback versus video demonstration. Okay. So video demonstration, like Chris said, was watching someone else do a motor task. So that could be shooting a basketball, but we're volleyball. So it could be spiking, could be blocking, serving, what have you. And there's a huge benefit to watching someone else because what we've learned called mirror neurons take place. So all the parts of the brain activate when you do a skill, activate when you watch someone, except for the execution of the task, because you're not moving, you're watching someone else do it. When you do video feedback, when you watch yourself, typically what happens is you get this constrained action because you're watching, critiquing, and you're worried about internal dialogue instead of what am I actually doing with the task, which is what you get from demonstration.
So demonstrations, we still feel like are a much more valuable way to communicate, intention of skill. Like, here's what we want you to do. This is the task. Here's how somebody that's doing this task would move. That's still something that we really advocate for.
Correct. If anyone's ever built IKEA furniture, watching someone else do it is much more easy than trying to learn from a manual.
And that's, and that's a really good point, is even something that's visual in a manual that I have to look at and read and kind of there's this instructional thing there is not as good as seeing somebody put it together, watching somebody actually do the task.
Correct. Yeah. And the one more thing I want to dive into here real quick, Chris, is in what we've been developing, we've noticed that having more demonstrations is beneficial. I know early on in the science, we had seen that watching it from multiple angles has been beneficial, but what we're starting to get into is if I have the opportunity to watch a person do the task, I get opportunities to then do it, and then I can refer back to it. Can I see the demonstration again? It's going back and forth between practice and observation. That's what we've seen is even more optimal than just one demonstration from multiple angles and then only practice.
Okay. So demonstrations kind of interspersed throughout the repetitions or continual value.
Correct.
Huh?
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we kind of emphasize in this idea of demonstration is that there's this, and you've referenced it, this idea that there's not a very good connection between verbal instruction and kind of adaptation to skill. That the visual input of seeing the actual skill being performed is much, much more effective as a coaching tool than trying to verbalize what needs to happen. Or as you pointed out, even, maybe they see on paper these directives that need to happen. And so is that still the case, that just verbiage is less efficient than the visual representation of the skill?
Correct. And there's multiple reasons. One of the primary reasons is just information is there's just more information in watching someone than being able to explain it in that same time frame.
Okay. All right. Great. Anything else you would feel like would be important to recognize with regards to demonstration? 2 points I think that have come out that are really interesting that you mentioned. First is that there's video demonstration is very valuable, and we'll get back to it a little bit when we start talking about feedback, but that video feedback is neutral at best. That we're not so stoked on video feedback, but video demonstration is great. And then demonstrations that are kind of interspersed among the repetitions, so that we have repeated demonstrations while the athlete's getting those reps is a valuable learning tool.
Correct. Yeah. Just imagine if you were a 2 or 3 year old and you're learning how to put food in your mouth for the first time. It's very beneficial to watch mom or dad do it, and then, oh, I can try to do it myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, the second big idea that we reference in our coaching clinics is this notion that motor programs are specific, or in other words, that, there's, as we talk about it, as Marv likes to say, you get good at what you spend your time doing. And not only that, but in a very specific way. So if you're learning to set by setting a ball against a wall, what you're learning to do is set a ball against a wall. You're not learning to set volleyball players that have passed you the ball, and now you have to set somebody that's attacking on a court with a net, with timing, that sort of thing. That the brain treats setting a ball against a wall as a different task than setting a live volleyball. And for a long time, we've advocated very strongly for that you get good at what you spend your time doing, that the brain, in order to develop skill, needs to be put in an environment where that skill is being used or performed in a very specific manner. And so a lot of getting good at volleyball is about being put in a training environment where there's high specificity, that it looks a lot like volleyball. Anything that you think is interesting or you'd want to clarify or add or point out to us about this notion of specificity?
Yeah, as far as specificity is concerned, there isn't this generalized athleticism. And I bet Chris has talked about this before on Gold Medal Squared, that just because you get really good as an athlete in volleyball doesn't mean that transfers to all the skills. Like, you might be a great spiker of the ball, but it doesn't mean you're going to be a great blocker and whatnot. And in the same way that if your environment, like setting a ball against a wall, doesn't match the game environment, it's not going to be beneficial.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting thing too. Quite often we compare, when we talk about specificity, we say, hey, look, just because you have an athlete that's a great basketball player, or, a great tennis player, or a great, you name it, other sport, doesn't mean they're going to be a good volleyball player. And we could even drill down into volleyball. Just because somebody is a great attacker doesn't mean they're going to be a great passer, and doesn't mean they're going to be a great server. And again, they're I think is instructional for us as coaches. For me, that, the idea of, that whole idea simply means, I can't make assumptions about my players' abilities or capacities until I get them in the gym and we start training. And so really, I don't care if you've been a good basketball player. I don't care if you've been a good tennis player. I'm going to get you in the gym and I'm going to train you the best I can at volleyball, and we'll see where it goes. Any kind of thoughts along those lines, or does that match up with what the research is telling us?
It matches up completely with what the research suggests, that the specificity of learning. And I've just learned a couple days ago that it's not just motor tasks, it's also intelligence tasks. So functionally, how do you problem solve is the same way with motor. It's very task specific.
Okay. All right, great. Anything else you can think of on the specificity front?
Yeah, one of the things I think is a neat facet of this for coaches is part of the reason there's a home court or home field advantage is that you get to practice in the gym you play. So all the stuff you're learning, it has the same reference, like the court size, the dimensions of the gym, the lines on the court, whatever. that's all relevant to where they learn. And because it's part of where they learn, they're more likely to get all those new skills than if they go to an away court.
Yeah, factor of in specificity, I think we reference that as state-dependent learning that builds in the environment and to some degree the emotional state of whatever, if the learner is in a constant state of fear or pressure or, feels loose or whatever the case may be, that all of those are built into the motor program. So as you say, it isn't just moving around. That people reference, hey, I'm going to teach my kids just to have these general abilities in moving around and have a feel for what their bodies are doing, and that was the classic kind of thing I hear parents talk about. Oh, I want to get my kids in gymnastics so that they kind of have a feel for what their body is doing. But really, again, they're learning, to be good at gymnastics, and that there will be very little transfer between what they learn there and what they take into whatever sport they're going to pursue next.
Correct. Yeah. Like gymnastics is not near similar to our sport. They're not going to be doing cartwheels or round-offs or what have you.
Yeah. And so there isn't this idea of general balance or general flexibility or general body and spatial awareness. That the brain simply doesn't work like that. What it learns when you're a kid doing gymnastics is specific to that environment and those tasks rather than what they would take into some other sport.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think, we get into this discussion and this is really in vogue right now and maybe a good time to address it. But, everybody gets bent out of shape about specializing in sports, right? And I've read a bunch of articles where it says, hey, these successful players in the NFL played baseball and basketball and ran track and played football. And they're I don't know, accounting for their success in football for having played all these other sports. And my contention is twofold. One is simply these individuals were good enough to participate in all these other sports, and so it turns out they've got this really good specific skills in lots of areas. But the other thing that I'm contending is you probably don't take any of the, again, specific skills from baseball, and that doesn't make you a better football player, but you could learn how to learn. And so you get exposed to different coaching styles, you get exposed to different types of feedbacks, you get experience with learning and seeing demonstrations and getting better as a learner. In that kind of sense, learning could be a specific skill as well. Is there anything to that idea that, hey, playing all these different sports makes you better at the sport that you eventually choose? Or is it all of these kind of, ancillary benefits that come from multiple sports? Maybe it gives you a little bit of rest or recovery from specific muscle groups. There's this idea of mental fatigue with just, hey, I'm burned out on playing this single sport the whole time. And so there's some kind of mental fatigue benefit of, hey, it's a different environment, different sport, kind of the novelty kind of makes things fresh for me again. Is there anything to the idea that, the skills will transfer, or are the benefits kind of these other benefits as you've seen it?
So as far as the motor learning literature would say something, we're not talking about fatigue, or I just want to talk about the motor skill acquisition quickly.
Yep.
Is that there is very little to no transfer between sports. There is somewhat transfer in overhand throwing tasks, but there's very little, if any. And most of it can be interfering. Like the size of a baseball is not the same size as a football, which is not the same thing as spiking a volleyball, which is not the same as hitting a tennis ball. Right. But there is some generic strength components that you'll get by throwing in different sports, but there is very little learning transfer that takes place between sports. And I want to make sure that's very clear because those are very different things.
Right.
As far as burnout is concerned, I'm not educated in burnout. I do know it exists. I do know that it's very hard to get kids to do stuff year round. So you get them involved in multiple sports and let them find out what they enjoy. I'm a believer in that. Let them enjoy what they like and have them try multiple things. As far as overuse injuries are concerned, especially with overhand throwing, one of the things that we talked about in my expertise class was that a lot of injuries are popping up now because like the quarterback is also the pitcher, which is also playing tennis, and those are all overhand actions. And so they get overuse injuries early because their arms don't get a break even though they change sports. So it's also good to, when you change sports, change positions so your muscles get a break.
Okay. So yeah, some interesting ideas there. And I think that maybe we can spend, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 Zoom sessions just on that topic, but we'll move on here. The kind of third big idea that we talk about in terms of motor learning is this idea of reps and feedback. And, the science, as we've quoted it in the past, is basically this idea that the single biggest predictor in athlete success or athlete, how do I want to say this? In athlete development or proficiency is simply the number of times they've performed that skill at an appropriate level of difficulty. In other words, the more volleyball you've played, that's the single most correlative predictor in how good you're going to be at volleyball. And is that still the case, that kind of repetitions trump all?
It is still the case. And one of the facets I want to add into that is that you want to have repetitions without seeming to be repetitious. And we'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay. That's great. So, and then the second kind of thing that we say is, okay, on top of all the game-like reps that you need to get. And so that for us, the message that we have in our clinics is that this creates this sense of urgency in practice to get reps, and that anything that you're doing in practice that doesn't look a whole lot like volleyball is probably a less efficient way to train. And, you may decide that, hey, I can be less efficient and that'll be okay. But for most of us, if we're coaching in a club environment or high school environment, our time constraints are really limited. We don't have a lot of time with our athletes to train. And so we can't really afford to be inefficient. And so we're trying to create these efficiencies. And so when practice starts, man, we better have a whole lot of things that look a lot like volleyball going on during practice, or somebody else is getting ahead. And so that's our contention with regards to reps and kind of where that leads us as coaches. And then the kind of other big idea that ties in with that is the second biggest factor in athlete proficiency and success levels is feedback. Did they get coached along the way while they were getting these reps? Is that still the case, that feedback is still a valuable tool for a developing athlete?
It's a second greatest predictor of athlete development and skill acquisition, other than reps itself.
Yeah. And so as we get thinking about feedback, that's probably an area where we as coaches can really have a significant influence, obviously in the way that we structure practice so that, we can influence how the reps are happening and what they look like, but we can also really influence our athletes from the feedback front. What recommendations do you have for us on that end? What can we do to give better feedback? What can we do to give more or less feedback? We just talked about it earlier, that video feedback. Tell us more about that. Let's start there. That it is indifferent at best and may be detrimental. And that's probably something where we've made some mistakes in the past, because we've been advocating for video feedback. But tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up, because a lot of coaches do it across a bunch of sports. And so what video feedback does is initiates this constrained action hypothesis. So what this means, generally speaking, is that if I think internally about my body, that it disrupts these automatic fluid processes that we have for movement. Like when you go to grab a cup, you don't think about, I need to lift my arm, extend my elbow, grab it with my hand and whatnot. That's all internal. You just go and grab the cup. So by watching video of yourself, you're initiating this internal dialogue of, I'm watching my body, I'm watching my feet, I'm watching all these things that I'm doing, instead of what is the task? Maybe it's spiking the volleyball, and I need to be more aware of where the opponent's block is, or the open parts of the court, or what have you. So I would highly not recommend doing video feedback. I would use video demonstration. Even watching teammates is more beneficial.
Okay. And so for us, at some point, we feel like, one of the things that we really want to focus in on is, okay, if there is a task, let's say serve receive, I'm going to pass a volleyball. We're going to say, okay, let's look and see what the most efficient way for the body to move is. What are the best players in the world doing? How does this task best accomplished at levels, that would allow athlete success across any level of the sport. So if you pass this way as a beginner, a 12-year-old, you'll be successful. If you pass this way as an international Olympic athlete, you would be successful. So we kind of want to drill down to what's the best way to perform this skill across any level. And then what are kind of the key elements of that? So let's say passing, for example, we notice that all the good players do put themselves in these, we see their bodies do this, for example, X, Y, or Z. And so for us, it has to do with how they hold their wrists in their hands. It has to do with how their platform is shaped, how they manipulate the platform, that sort of thing. How do you reliably then get those mechanics in place if we can't have the idea of, I don't want to, if I'm watching video of myself, how do I know if my wrists and hands were right, or if my, platform was managed correctly? What's a better way of getting at that feedback wise?
You're dividing it into two different topics here. One of them is about instruction. So how do I teach this content?
Yep.
And the other one is going back evaluation of, am I learning the content?
Okay. Well, let's look at both of those then.
So as far as instruction is concerned, it's important that to avoid this constrained action stuff, have as many demonstrations along with the instruction as possible. So like I would have this video demonstration of, say, Karch. He's a great volleyball passer. So watch Karch do this. Now here's what, pay attention, cue it. Like, oh, watch his arms, or watch what he's doing with this. And now go have opportunities to explore that for your own and pass. Okay. And then we're getting into evaluation of like, am I doing this, that, or the other? What the most important thing is, like, am I accomplishing the task at hand? It doesn't have to look perfect, but the task at hand is what's important. If the technique is not perfect, that's okay. They're learning. Most people's technique is not expert at all. So it's okay to be at this intermediate level and still progress because they're completing the task. Okay.
And so that would probably require, on my end for sure, I know how I coach, maybe more patience than I've demonstrated in the past, because I kind of want to provide solutions and give correction and kind of get to it. But we just need to keep demonstrating, keep giving opportunities for them to, as you say, explore based on the demonstration and go further. At some point, is it possible that we can have conversations about, hey, you might want to consider making these mechanical changes? It just, I think it goes against for what most of us as coaches do for sure, and what we've kind of experienced, to just say, hey, I'm never going to talk about mechanical changes with our athletes. What's the best way to approach that?
So one of the best ways to do that is you can describe with your athletes the process of the technique and whatnot, as long as you end it with an external focus. So passing the volleyball. So in this case, like maybe I'm focused on passing midline passing, let's say. Show them the technique, explain the technique, but end it with, I need you to pass it to target, whatever that target is.
Okay. And so at the end, we want them to be conscious of these mechanics, hey, I need, let's say, you to keep your, platform straight when you're passing, but there has to be also a connection to the outcome of the task. Huh?
Yeah. Cause that's what they're primarily going to do. Whatever technique it is, it has to complete the task.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And for us at Gold Medal Squared, we kind of feel like, whatever technique it is, if we can get them into techniques that will be a little bit more robust, or a little bit, like, hey, if your technique is bend your elbows and then, there's a lot of this going on, probably that'll work at the 12-year-old level. because the ball's moving so slow. But you can't have that if you're going to be an international pro, because the game just simply moves too fast. And so for us, we like to kind of head them towards what experts do, as opposed, because we feel like that'll create a little bit more durability long term. Mike, you got some input here?
The external feedback stuff, I just think it'd be helpful for everyone listening. Andrew, if you could give examples of, say, spiking, say blocking, say serving, maybe of each skill, the difference, and just so everyone really has a clear understanding of what it is that concept is all about, that'd be great.
For sure. Yeah. So internal, like I said earlier, is about the body, thinking about body parts, foot position, hand position, what have you. External is about the task itself, or the movement outcome. So in a sport like volleyball, spiking would be, where am I trying to hit it? Down the line, cross court, off the block, what have you. That would be a great thing for spiking. For setting, it's about focusing on, where's the ball going to end up? Do I put it to the outside? Do I focus on a quick set for the middle, or back set for the right side, what have you? Look at the location or the arc of the ball would be great external focus. For passing, it would be like, where do I want the ball to be passed to? Where does that end location look like? What arc of the ball do I want? For blocking, it's a little interesting, right? So what we've devised is, as an external focus, is if you paint something on the back of their wrists and say, I want those things across the net, instead of saying, I want your hands across the net, you will immediately see benefits. I know athletes may say it's funky. Maybe you have them choose their favorite color to put it on, or a star or something. But seriously, like, this external focus is a huge improvement right away.
Okay. And so as I'm hearing you, I think people think it needs to be either or. And it sounds like it can be a combination of both. Like, we can have some internal cues, but we'll also, if we couple those with some external ideas, that the learning will happen a lot faster.
As long as you have this end result of it really is the end product is external that matters the most, because that's the last thing the athlete hears. You can educate them with an internal system, like, oh, this is what it looks like, this is the body position, video demonstration, but you need the external cue to finish to get that performance benefit.
Okay, great. Well, let's anything else to add about internal, external while we're talking about it that you feel is relevant?
Yeah, just to bolster the claims, my professor who worked with USA Track and Field back in the day, immediately saw benefits in the performance of Olympic level long jumpers, and several inches of improvement, where if you get a physiological training regimen and you see it like 2 inches in a couple of months or 6 months, like, that's amazing at the Olympic level. They were seeing 4 to 6 inches of improvement within minutes of doing this. That's how powerful this external feedback is. Okay.
Mike, another thing to add?
There's a good question that I think everyone would be interested in. Tim's asking, excuse me, is a passing external focus something more like see the spin of the ball as it comes at you, or are you more focused on the result, like passing to the target?
Yeah, that's a great question. Both of those would be considered external focus. The more beneficial one is the movement outcome. So what can I do to contribute to where the pass goes?
Got it. Thanks.
All right. Well, let's move on to some other ideas that you've got for us here. So we've kind of covered, hey, here's what we at Gold Medal Squared have been advocating for a long time. And again, one of the things that I think is one of the aims of our organization is, let's provide utility. What can a coach take from these ideas and implement in practice that'll make them better right away? And so you've got what we think are 3 other good ideas for coaches as they start coaching that can help them right off the bat.
Yeah, the first one I would like to call incidental choice.
Okay.
So what that means is choice that is not relevant to the task. So what we've seen in the research is that if you can provide athletes with the opportunity to choose something versus just be directed to do something, they're more invested into the learning, and thereby will increase their learning outcomes, and thereby their expectancies and their performance increases, and you get this positive feedback loop by providing choice.
So let's give a few examples of that.
Yeah, that's one of the great examples that's very easy that we could do today is pick which ball you want to use in the drill that you're doing. So like, let's say you have a 6-on-6 drill and the kids choose, I want the blue and yellow ball or the high school ball or whatever, even if it's just picking a ball from a cart, let them pick which one they want to use. And no option, like meaning they don't want to pick any, like I don't want to choose, it's also them choosing.
Okay. And so just lots of really good examples. We could do this if we're teaching a passer, or we're getting reps with a passer, we could just, hey, what zone do you want to start in?
Correct.
Which side of the court do you want to, and just some of these where we're indifferent, maybe as coaches, as to their choice, maybe not so much what drill do you want to do today, because we care more about that, but within the drill, something that we don't care at all about, like it doesn't matter to us how we do this, but we're letting the player choose that, huh?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I want to start in zone 5 or zone 4 or zone, whatever it is. Just let them choose. And it could be, I want to start on this side of the court versus that side of the court.
Okay. And so we're calling that this idea of incidental choice, and tell us again, it allows the learner to more effectively engage.
Yeah, because they feel invested in the process of learning, that they're contributing somehow to their own learning process. And it's like if you learned anything on your own, like you're really interested in what you learned because you're invested in it. And in the same way, when you provide choices, the same outcome happens in the practice gym.
Okay, great. So incidental choice. So let's mark that as kind of a thing that the coaches can take right to the gym right now. What's another one that you really like?
What we're working on as of late is something called the parallel development hypothesis. So what that states is that as the skill level of the learner starts from low and then increases to high, the level of difficulty of the practice should increase in conjunction with that skill level of the learner to get this optimal level of difficulty. So like if you have new athletes that have never played volleyball, the practice should be fairly easy for them so that they learn how to do the volleyball skills. But as they get better in their skill development, you should increase the difficulty of the practice so you can control and contain this optimal learning environment.
Okay. So I think in the past we've referenced that as kind of, as we talk about, maybe we reference it in an area where we've looked at progressions, we talk about appropriate regulatory stimuli. And so does that kind of match up with that idea?
Somewhat. It's more about blocked versus random practice. So
okay.
that as the learner is introduced to the skill and hasn't done it before, the practice should be more blocked because they're just learning how to do it. But as they get better, you need to make it more random or serialized. So it's like doing something twice, then doing a new thing twice, then going back, doing it twice, and then completely random where a bunch of reps and it's very game-like. Yeah. But if you make it too hard or too easy, this optimal learning environment doesn't exist.
Okay. We've talked about that at length, I think, in the blocked versus random conversations that we've had. And I think that, we're pretty tightly aligned with you on that front for sure. And what are there any kind of things you can tell us, or, I think as a coach, that's one of the things that you wonder or that you try to figure out is, how easy is too easy? How difficult is too difficult? When is the time to increase the complexity of the task or the randomness of the task? Any, guidelines that you could think of that maybe coaches could look for or kind of think about as they're advancing through that?
Something that I've liked is this 50% success rate. So this comes from gambling research. And what they've found is that people are interested in doing something if they have a 50-50 shot. Like I've got a chance to do it, but I also can lose. So I have to be invested in what I'm doing. And then the same thing in the learning process, if we have that 50% chance rate, like I'm starting to get the hang of it, but I still fail sometimes. So if you can induce that with your athletes, it's very probable that they hit that optimal learning environment.
Okay, great. I've read some research where it talked about athlete sense of their accomplishment or their kind of like their contentment level is best when they're succeeding at 70 to 80%, but they actually get better faster if they're only succeeding in the 50 to 60% range. And
Correct.
so that's I suppose this other idea is, how do we get our athletes to kind of get uncomfortable and be okay with that, and coaching that aspect of it as well, because they're actually going to get better faster if we make the task a little more difficult than they would prefer.
Correct. And a great example for our sport would be, let's say, serving. It's pretty easy as an example. The first iteration of this might be, can you get 50% of the balls just over the net? Just, can you serve it over the net? And then it'd be, can you serve it to half of the court? And then you can make the zone smaller and smaller. What else you can do is, like, could you make it over the net and at this speed? Because that's more difficulty, and you can challenge your athletes that way. Or can you put passers on the court? Now you have to hit a seam, which is much smaller than a zone. So that's ways you can induce this difficulty in the serving task.
Okay. Sounds great. And then kind of big idea 3 that you've got for us. So we've got incidental choice. What are we calling big idea 2 here? This
parallel development hypothesis.
Parallel development. Yeah.
Skill level and practice difficulty should parallel each other.
Okay, great. And then what's our third idea that we want to look at?
Something that's relatively new in our science called the constraint-led approach, or CLA for short. And what it suggests is that as coaches, if you're inducing game-like practices, should construct the environment so that it would elicit organically the behaviors you want. So for instance, if you're working on hitting off the block and you're just having a tough time because you talk with your players, what are you aiming for? What are you looking at? You should look at these things in the block or what have you. What they found is that if you just construct a drill that would have many opportunities to create those things, you actually see a more robust learning process because they have internalized it without actually understanding that they've done it.
So give us a little bit more of an example of that. So let's say I want to train my players to attack off the block. And so what would be the kind of a good example of doing this the right way with a constraint-led approach?
Yeah, so one would be to, let's say you initiate a free ball to one side or the other and say the first ball has to go to the outside. So the players know it's going there, and it's forcing a harder block opportunity for the outside to be successful. So what you're going to see more likely is that I have to figure out creative ways to be successful. So they're going to hit off the block organically, and you just put more rallies in play that will force them to choose to hit off the block.
Okay. And is it good to create incentives to hit off the block? Is it, are we indifferent to those kinds of things? I know some coaches like to say, hey, if we happen this, we get some kind of bonus. I was always of the mind that just, hey, points were going to be whatever, but I was just going to give them increased opportunities. Do we want to create incentives or just create more opportunities, or both?
Both is most optimal as far as this approach is concerned. Because what it takes away is you have less feedback opportunities because you're putting more repetitions in play, but you're creating that organic learning process. Yeah.
And I think that matches up pretty well with some of the things that Mike and I have talked about in the past. And really is just, once we have your movement patterns in place at a level that we think is reasonable, let's say with attack, your attack mechanics are good. You've got good footwork, your arm work is good. You get into these good, mechanical attack positions. Now, all of the kind of attack instruction is just outcome based. Hit it down the line. And then they get to go experiment with ways to hit it down the line. If I move this way, where does it go? If I move this way, where does it go? And then we can create drills where we say, all right, this ball has to get hit down the line. And now they're in a little bit more advanced competitive environment, but they've been told, here's the outcome that we want, but you get to figure out how to make that outcome happen. You like
Correct,
that approach?
Yeah. I love that approach because it allows the learner to have their own individualized solution.
Mm-hmm. And that's a much more effective and, like you say, robust kind of permanent way to embed learning, as opposed to, I'm going to provide the solution for you. Here's, all of the mechanical things maybe that you need to do to hit it down the line, or, here's, take an approach that goes this direction or something like that to hit it down the line. And so we're not doing that. We're just saying, hey, with your good mechanics, go solve the problem.
Correct. Yeah. It's a great way. And like you said, robust means permanent. And what we've seen using this approach is that under stress and under pressure, they're more like the learners, the athletes themselves are much more likely to go result back on what you've taught them using this approach than other approaches.
What's maybe one more example for us for a volleyball skill that would be using this constraint-led approach? Maybe, do you have anything from like serve and pass or even setting?
Yeah, a great example for let's say serve and pass, because you can do it both ways, would be to constrain where the servers can serve to. Say like, I only want serves going to area 1 and 6 because I've noticed my team struggles with that. So you're gaining more reps doing those things. And you're also teaching your servers, I need to serve those locations. And you say, maybe you get a double point if you win after you've served that point.
Okay. And how about like setting? Anything with there? Is it, hey, I want to teach my setter maybe to make some of the difficult sets. So this play, the ball has to go in the gap or something like that, or this ball has to go to a certain hitter?
Yeah, you could set it up where like maybe your setter's having difficulty setting far, like on the opposite side of the court. So you would say in this drill, you have to set far. You can set quick wherever you want, but you have to set far on the opposite side of the court. And it's constraining their actions within the drill because you're eliciting that benefit for them, that training regimen for them, and they're getting reps practicing doing it.
Okay, great. Anything else to add about those ideas? So we talked about incidental choice, we talked about parallel development hypothesis, and then this kind of constraint-led approach. Anything else you want to add on those fronts?
Yeah, I want to make sure that our listeners understand that when we did this at Pepperdine with this constraint-led approach, I wasn't personally there when we did it, but David Hunt, when I talked with him about it, implemented it, and he had spent weeks trying to teach his kids how to hit off the line and off the block. And once he switched to this approach, he nearly saw it within a couple of weeks. Like, they just get it. And it kind of takes away from our ego as coaches. Like, we should just provide solutions for them. But, maybe the best coaching is we let them solve the problem.
Yeah, I like it. All right, great. Well, Mike, we've got maybe 13 more minutes. Let's get to some questions.
Yeah, we've got a lot of great questions here. Let's see. Obviously, a lot of athletes are at home right now. A quick question as it relates to transfer and athletes at home trying to, I guess, stay, improve. Obviously, there's limitations. It's not an ideal scenario. But do you have any suggestions in terms of transfer to real life volleyball and how these athletes that are oftentimes by themselves, setting to themselves, setting against a wall, are there any, from a learning standpoint, are there any suggestions that you can make?
Yeah, try to make it as game-like as possible. Obviously, if you're by yourself or you have only 1 or 2 siblings with you or parents you can play with or something like that, try to do that if you can, even if it's not the greatest volleyball, because it's going to be more game-like. And as far as if you're by yourself, mental practice or mental reps, imaging yourself doing the task, imagining yourself within the environment you play in is very powerful.
All right. Yeah, it's certainly not an ideal scenario. We're doing the best we can. So, to the folks that are asking this question, I wouldn't say it's useless. I think a lot of, mostly we're just trying to get through this the best we can and stay engaged the best we can. So I wanted to get down to this question from Matt. It's a good question here. Augmented feedback is used to help athletes intrinsically, I butchered that, understand and correct their errors. But how can you increase the athlete's intrinsic understanding, especially when the athlete is not aware of what they are doing and not having successful performance without using video feedback?
So there's a couple of presuppositions within that question. It assumes that the athlete themselves is having unsuccessful performance and will only be successful with video feedback. I would counteract that. I don't believe that to be the case. Even if they're unsuccessful and let's say they're new or their motor program isn't very strong, like just giving them more opportunities to respond is most beneficial.
Okay.
So, Andrew, diving a little bit deeper into this, I suppose we need to define terms here. Augmented feedback.
Yeah,
For one thing, we need to define that, and then help athletes intrinsically understand and correct their errors. Let's talk about an intrinsic understanding. So let's just be clear on those two ideas. What are we talking about with augmented feedback, and what do we mean by intrinsic understanding of performance?
Yeah, so augmented feedback, as far as the definition is concerned, is feedback that comes from a non-regulatory source. So something that is external to the environment. So that might be from a coach. It could be even your watch giving you or your heart rate, because your heart rate beats, but you wouldn't know it unless you saw it from an augmented source. So typically it's a coach in our practice of volleyball. And having this intrinsic feedback or intrinsic understanding to solve a problem is like self-evaluation without having to evaluating without having to think about evaluating. It would be like a player understanding like, oh, I missed the line, but I don't need to think about how I need to solve the problem. I kind of already understand what I missed or how I messed up. Maybe it was my footwork, or I didn't jump to the ball instead of getting my feet there or something like that.
Okay. And so we talk about the fact that augmented feedback, in other words, just kind of feedback from something other than the result and their own analysis, is used to help athletes become more intrinsic or help them kind of have a better sense of what's happening. And so, so I guess the question from the coach here isn't so much, what if we only had video feedback, but how do we help athletes become more intrinsically aware? Is there a way to do that through any kind of augmented feedback, be it video, our coaching, something else? Is there a way to facilitate more intrinsic awareness?
Yeah, actually that's a great point. So like what you're getting at is what's the best way to give feedback, and in terms of developing that. And so what we've seen is that if I give you something positive that you've done, even if you completely messed up the task, give them something that they did well, and then follow that up immediately with instruction of, this is what I want you to do on the next task. You'll see a lot more benefits because the science is behind that strategy.
Okay. So in helping them understand intrinsically, I'm going to, highlight something that went well. So I'm going to have some positive feedback for them about whatever the case may be. And then when you say give them some instruction, what does that instruction look like or sound like at our best?
Yeah. So like this
again, with the idea that I'm trying to create intrinsic awareness, or
so maybe you give
sense of how I'm moving.
Gotcha. So maybe you give them feedback on like, your footwork pattern was great when you went to approach and attack the ball, but next time I want to make sure that you get on top of the ball, you're hitting it down instead of hitting it out of bounds or something like that. That would be the optimal combination of both.
Okay. So I'm going to have some positive feedback about maybe something that's going on mechanically, and then I can give some instruction about further mechanics if I want. But hey, maybe, hey, your arms only got to here. Let's see if we can get a double arm lift and then have a demonstration again of what we're trying to do.
Correct.
Okay. Coupling our feedback with some more demonstrations. Hey, look, let's see if we can get your arms back up in here like this. Like, here's this video. Okay. Hey, great footwork. Yours look just like that. Now, see this double arm lift? Go do that now, kind of thing.
Correct.
All right, great. Mike, another question?
Have either of you read the book Range? Making Connections. The question is, what about the value of making connections between different sports as explained in the book Range? If we haven't read that, we'll have to read it and report back to James here.
Yeah.
Negative?
Yep, I think that's moving on here, yeah.
Okay. James, we'll get back to you on that. Is there any level of general ability that does contribute across domains, like lower body strength, explosiveness, mobility, ankle stability, stuff like that? There's quite a few questions in here about transfer. It's always a hot topic.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Chris?
Well, I like he summarizes the question by saying skills are specific, but are there underlying human movements applicable across tasks. And so the kind of the party line that we've been towing for a long time is that there are levels of specificity across like multiple domains here. So in other words, there's skill specificity, which is largely neural, connections, motor programs. There's physiological specificity. In other words, energy uptake, oxygen, heart rate, your ability of your body to provide energy. So be it through, breathing and just energy uptake, there's specificity in those areas. There's raw strength specificity. Just are you strong? Do your muscles go, and can you provide power? There's that specificity. And then finally, there's flexibility. Are your joints and, is all that flexible? And what we say is all of those areas are accounted for by performing in the sport. In other words, the best way to become physiologically fit for volleyball is to play volleyball. The best way to become strong for volleyball is to play volleyball. The best way to become flexible for volleyball is to play volleyball. And finally, the best way to become skilled at volleyball is to play volleyball. So we talk about, hey, there's, really we're developing skill, but we're also becoming specifically good in all of these other areas as well. And so, and we talk about this kind of sports specificity for fitness, for strength, for flexibility. And so that's kind of, I guess, where we've been talking about it. But the question really is, is there a way to, do those qualities transfer if I play baseball or if I play football, if I have a general base of, kind of talked about strength, flexibility, physiological adaptation, does that transfer? And so what's been your experience and based on what you've seen and researched?
Based on the research, as far as skill acquisition and learning in general, it would say that tasks are very specific to whatever you're doing. So if I'm focused on baseball and pitching, there's very little to any transfer to football, and may even be detrimental because the football throwing mechanics is going to be different than the baseball throwing mechanics. So you may have interference and negative transfer.
Okay. But is there any kind of value to the idea that there's, I can create a physical base to now propel me to success?
Correct. There is some research suggesting the idea that having playing a lot of different things is beneficial for brain development and growth, but it doesn't mean that you'll develop expertise in any of those things. Okay.
So what we have talked about is that with the vast majority of athletes, they have or will develop sufficient strength, flexibility, physiological, by simply getting them on the court to play volleyball. That we don't need to create, hey, you're too weak to play volleyball, so we're going to put you through some kind of training regimen to establish ankle flexibility, torsional strength, rotational, whatever, that sort of thing. That there isn't some kind of baseline regimen that we need to subject our athletes to because they're simply too weak to start. I mean, I just think about my 11-year-old daughter. She's out there, she's this little twig, and it wasn't as if we started by sending her to the weight room to get stronger. It was just, no, go play volleyball and you'll get stronger and figure it out, and your body will adapt as you get going.
Correct. Yeah. It's the same way for all sports you play, whether it's water polo, volleyball, long distance running, what have you.
Okay. And Lauren, while we're at it here, Lauren has a question. Why do teams at all levels use weight training to augment their ability if that's not transfer in any way? And I know for our guys, it's almost entirely about managing load and injury prevention than it is about being better at volleyball. And so, when you jump, however high you jump, 30 inches, 40 inches, and you're coming down on the ground and you're doing that 100 times a day, our strategy is to, enable them to do that for a long period of time through the course of a match at a high level. but B, over the course of a season, reduce the risk of injury. And so, Lauren, that's our goal there. Andrew and Chris, did I miss anything there in terms of why we lift weights?
Andrew, I'd be curious to get your take.
Yeah, so as far as weight training is concerned, whether it's conditioning or with actual physical weights, that is just to the benefit of preventing injury, primarily speaking. Those percentages increase that you get in the weight room that would transfer to volleyball are like 1 to 2%, if that. It's really not about, I bring out all this explosive power from my squat because it transfers to volleyball, because it doesn't. The motor pack program for squatting is different than for jumping, because those are different tasks.
Yeah. But if you have time, if you're a club team or a high school team and you have time to get quality strength and conditioning in place, the benefit is injury prevention, and maybe we can perform at have more endurance through the course of a match. But if we were faced with a situation where it was, hey, we can only do one or the other, clearly we'd want to play volleyball. So let's do a couple more here. So Chris, back to, we were using hitting down the line as an example. Mm-hmm. If the set doesn't allow it, and we're in an activity where it's, hey, we want you to hit down the line. If the set doesn't allow it, we want the athletes to make a good choice. So we don't want them to lock in to, or force them into a shot if the set doesn't allow for it. So in an activity, what would we do in that situation? Just wash it out or play it out, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that for me, that's really interesting. What about the set didn't allow it? Was it really inside? And so I like him to try to solve that problem regardless of the set. And so, hey, I really need to adjust my approach so that I get so far over to the ball that now I can go turn it back because I've made that adjustment. And then sometimes we if you're coaching in a drill like that, it's valuable to just say, hey, that ball was, really hard to hit down the line. But you tried to do it and you got over to it, and man, you did your best, and look at that, off we go. And it's just, tough luck. But I still like having that in there, because now it opens up again new possibilities for, hey, in order to solve this problem, I maybe have to do something that's really unusual. And, what is it about this solution that, or how can I get at this solution no matter what the environment? Because sets are going to be bad or good or whatever the case may be. You're going to get bad sets. You're going to get tough sets. You're going to get, good sets. And so being able to solve the problems of volleyball within all of those sets, I think, is a really healthy exercise. And so I'd still kind of like making that constraint. Andrew, how do you feel about that?
I would say the same thing. Like, allow them to solve the problem. Like, find a way to hit it down the line. If you mess it up, it's okay. Like, it's going to happen in the match. And if you end up finding a successful solution and compensate for it, all the better.
Yeah. And Andrew, I think you point out something important that we value very highly, is this idea of, if you make a mistake, it's okay. And that, I think, has to become part of the culture in your gym, is that when we're trying new things, if we're trying to explore what we're capable of and how to create these solutions, that there can't be a big penalty for failure, that I can't put in place systems or scoring mechanisms or whatever that really penalize the athlete for failure. And, at some point I've got to create some freedom for them to, solve these problems. And when I'm solving problems, there will be a lot of mistakes. And so when I'm in those kind of modes of training, having an environment where, mistakes are acceptable and they're encouraged, and let's figure this out. I think that's really, really healthy in terms of that environment for the athlete to succeed.
I agree. Like, you learn through failure. Like, there isn't anything in the research that says that you have to be successful to be successful. And it happens in our sport as well. Like, you have to learn, like, oh, that's not the right solution to the problem. I got to try something different. Or maybe I just didn't execute the solution that was the right one.
Okay. Mike, more questions? Couple more?
A couple more here. With the video demonstration that you discussed, Andrew, how much do you show the good reps versus the bad reps to improve skill?
You want to let them see them doing it right. That's what will transfer. If you want to get those mirror neurons of activated, like this is what it looks like to do the task correctly, then go try do it. If you show them something wrong, whatever wrong means to you, then they're going to try to do the wrong thing.
So 100 to 0.
I wouldn't say 100 to 0, but I would definitely go much more towards this is how you do it right.
Okay. How about age with motor learning? Is it easier for a beginner to learn a new skill than, say, someone who's been in the sport for 10, 15 years?
What's the skill they're learning?
Is it a new skill or a modified skill, I guess is what we need. Let's say that. I've been playing volleyball for a long time, but I've never been a jump server. Okay. So I've played, and I'm learning to jump serve for the first time. And here's a beginner that's not played any volleyball really, or is just starting up, and they're learning to jump serve, the same skill for the first time. Does one group or another have an advantage?
You could say that the person, let's say they're equal age in this example, that you could say that there might be some transfer because they've played with volleyball before, but honestly, they're going to be about the same because that's going to be a new motor program that they're exploring.
Okay. And let's say a 14-year-old versus a 24-year-old. Any indications in the science that maturity or age or any of that beyond maybe just the physical capacity, does that change anything?
No, like if you're new to something, you learn just as anyone else does. If I'm an expert like Bo Jackson at football and baseball, but I'm trying water polo for the first time, you're just as good as anyone else.
Okay. Or just as bad as anyone else,
Correct.
As the case may be, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we all start learning the same way, no matter how good we are in other things.
Okay.
And Tom Brady trying to play golf. Yeah. Okay. There's some curiosity about this video feedback topic. Without the athlete watching some video of themselves performing a task, isn't it possible that they think they are exactly performing the same as the demo? So they could be thinking they're doing it right, but they're not because we aren't giving them feedback of themselves performing the task.
That's where the one case I would show them like, hey, this is the demonstration. This is where you're at. So just to elicit that, oh, I need a change. And I think I'm doing it right versus I am doing it right, whatever right means to you. But outside of that, I wouldn't show them that because showing them doing it wrong, even if it's themselves, is not helpful.
Other than to create kind of a baseline for some future kind of conversation, like, hey, let's establish that some changes need to happen. And here's what, example of changes need to happen. But now from here on out, we're going to show you the example of this is the correct thing that's happening, or the example of here's how we want to do it.
Correct. It would be like the aha moment kind of idea.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm not there, but now show me what it looks like, Yeah.
Correct.
And then if that aha moment happens and they get it and they go into a match and they perform those skills really well, then, hey, let's show them that. Let's reinforce it. We're not going to show them all this, stuff that they need to fix or this and that. We're going to show them, hey, we've been talking about this in practice. You went in the match, you did it. Here's yourself doing it. And we're stoked, right? That'd be fine.
Yeah. So like there's interesting research done with the world of ice hockey that have shown that you get testosterone increases when you see yourself doing it well, that you perform the task well, and that will affect the way you learn because of that testosterone being increased.
And again, just the power, even chemically, of positive feedback.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or hormonally, perhaps, instead of not chemically. Mike, any other big questions? We're running long, but this is good stuff.
We'll do one more here. What do you guys think's better? 50 reps of setting off a toss to a target, or 500 sets against a wall? It takes the same amount of time. One contains the specificity principle and the other contains the rep principle. Maybe it's not one or the other, but What do you guys think on that one?
For me, I would take the 50 tosses because it's more closely related to and resembles the task that they're going to perform.
Chris?
Yeah, I think yeah, we've hopefully beat that question up. That what you're getting. I mean, you're basically with 500 reps against the wall. You're really cementing that motor program for setting against the wall, and very little again transfer even within similar tasks. So similar, we could say it's setting against a wall. The brain treats that differently than setting a live pass to a live hitter. And it even treats, to some degree, setting a tossed pass to no hitter differently than setting a passed ball to a live hitter. And so again, the best teaching, as Marv likes to say, the best way to practice setting is pass, set, hit. The best way to practice passing is pass, set, hit. So just volleyball within the context of competition. So as closely as we can match our training to the context of competition, that's where best learning and maximal transfer happens.
All right, one more on this idea of allowing your athletes to solve problems and choose. And the question is, some of these, they're calling it meaningless choices, have diminishing returns over time. And so if you're giving the kids options to choose and to do some things within an activity and practice over time, does that lose its luster the more they do it? Do you guys have any experience with that?
So with this incidental choice, the literature states as long as they have some apparatus of choice, that will be effective. It doesn't say, it's not like an additive effect where like if I give them 10 choices, now it's really optimal, or 100 choices. It's including choice and practice. That's the important part.
So Andrew, I think maybe to elaborate on that question, I think and I'm assuming what the question is here, but the intent of the question is maybe, let's say I let you choose which zone you want to start passing in. And let's say I do that activity 100 times. And I let you choose every day, which zone do you want to pass in? Which zone do you want to pass in? Which zone do you want to pass in? By the, is there some diminishing return on the value of that choice by the time I get to the 100th choosing of it versus the first couple, hey, I get to choose which zone I'm in to pass. Ooh, fun. Does the kind of routine of the same choice diminish the effectiveness of that choice as time goes on? Anything in the literature about that?
I don't think there's anything about that specifically. That would be a great idea for a study. But what I would project based on what we have produced is that there wouldn't necessarily be that diminishing return.
Okay. But if the question asker wants to get a PhD, here's a great dissertation waiting for you right out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mike, anything else?
That's good.
Okay. Well, everybody, thanks again for joining us. I know these, we probably create a lot more questions than we answer here, but the kind of intent of this was, at the end of the day, what are some things that I can take away as a coach to be better? And Andrew talked to us about kind of the ideas within some of what we're doing with Gold Medal Squared, but he also referenced, let your athlete have some choices. And Andrew, correct me if you think I'm not saying this the right way. Let your athlete have some choices about things maybe that are completely indifferent to you, but allows them to choose when you're going out and doing a drill. The idea of parallel development hypothesis, again, we're trying to create an environment where we're pushing consistently at this maybe 50%-ish success rate. And however we're defining success, did the outcome happen? If we can, have the outcome happen at about 50%, it kind of creates this good challenge point to our learning. And then finally, create some environments in your practice where you constrain the outcome, where you say, this is the outcome that I want to have happen with this rep, and it has to go here, kind of thing. And create a practice environment where we're constraining what the athletes do and constraining the outcome of practice. And if we can kind of start implementing those three ideas, I think our practices will be more effective. Andrew, you good with all that?
Yes, I am.
All right, sweet. Well, again, thanks for joining us. And Andrew, thank you so much for being a part of this, and wish you the best of luck as you continue out there at Tennessee, and just appreciate your time and your expertise and your inclusion in our conversation.
Thank you guys for having me. This has been great.
Okay. Well, just a reminder, Gold Medal Squared, we're continuing with our clinic series. Later in July, we'll be in Utah, we'll be in Texas, we'll be in Washington. In those 3 states, the last 3 weekends sequentially there in July. And if you got more questions, come to a coaching clinic, and we'd love to see you there. Mike, thanks again for getting us set up.
All right. Thanks to all. Have a great day.